who's a he's a revolutionary, and he's an organizer. He's all kind. He's let's put it that way. We're gonna talk some politics right now. So David, you I know you through the circles here in LA of organizing and through fighting for a better world, and fighting for those really strident revolutionary politics that that are really that move the city. So can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved in the politics you did?
Um, I feel like I've always had some involvement or some education growing up back in Broken Park, Minnesota. Just through the public education system. Like I was fortunate where in fourth grade and then in junior high, they had us read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then I felt like I was always into like trying to help out in the community in some way growing up. But then it felt like I feel like with a lot of people, they just kind of get into like what they want to do individually in their life. And at the time, growing up towards an adult, I just ended up going into movies and TV, which is why one of the reasons why I came out to LA was to work in movies and TV. Um, but growing up, I felt like there was some education and some understanding, especially like being fortunate of having like certain public speakers come to our school talking about racism and experiences that certain Southeast Asian people go through, particularly um, like my Hmong friends and stuff growing up. Um, but yeah, so there was some education stuff, but didn't get radical until around 2012, um, after the Occupy encampment, and it was also relating to just like the economy, just seeing what was going on as a freelance artist in the VFX industry, and then just like also with like the Trayvon Martin case, just connecting that to like some of the stuff that like either like I went through, some of my other Asian friends have gone through, or some of my black friends have gone through growing up in Broken Park, as far as like with racism and like certain levels of police profiling, you know, you can get, and that was like one of my main gateways as far as like radical politics in certain ways. I mean, interesting enough though, before I got into radical politics, that's something I talk about more now. I kind of leaning towards being kind of like a right wing almost for a second, especially when you get confused with what the concept of like anarchism is and stuff. That's where you get into like the libertarian type anarchism, like the right libertarianism
Right.
as opposed to left libertarianism. And I feel like that was related to like growing up, as like uh, a Vietnamese refugee from like quote unquote communism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I had to understand like something wasn't right with the government. I wasn't really in like it didn't feel right with Obama with the bombings and stuff. So that's where like there's this, and then also like relating to the police. So like even to this day, like whatever work I'm trying to do, I feel like it has to relate to like the police in some way. Like it has to be not for the police. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
I'm interested because I remember, I remember seeing this as I don't remember what year it happened, but I remember it being like having a huge impact on me, which was when I saw the story about the guy that owned the laundromat in it's in Orange County. It was either Gordon Grove or Westminster, and he had the
Hmm.
picture of Ho Chi Minh in
Oh
the
yeah.
window, and there was this huge pushback, and there was a huge fight about that. Um, and that was when I really understood. I came to understand that there was a lot of Vietnamese Americans who that are here who are very anti-communist, very similar to the Cuban Americans, or many of them very similar. Not all, but like you know, and they're not all Cuban Americans either. So I mean, like, but like that was a big political trend.
Hmm.
Can you speak a little bit about that? How the political trend of some of the anti-communism you mentioned?
They where it all came from and stuff. like where all the anti-communists came
Yeah,
from with
yeah. Like, how do you explain the this one individual saying like Ho Chi Minh's great, and then all these other people saying they don't want that?
how do you explain that? That's a question.
Yeah, yeah. To our audience, I mean, like I know what I think, but I mean, but to the audience who might not be familiar with the situation.
Yeah. No, thanks. I just want to make sure I understood what the question was all. Yeah, because also like just you said it was a laundromat, right?
Was I wrong? I remember. This is
That's
like
okay. Yeah, it's okay. There was actually a VHS store
okay,
uh,
okay.
in Little Saigon back in the 90s. Yeah, basically like, and the reason why, like, do you know why he did it right off the bat or no?
It's like a kind of a vague memory to me. So it's like but it really stood out. Like I remember this one guy,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah, it was like the late 90s, if I recall. And yeah, that was something I learned when I started getting radical, like particularly through this one older Japanese elder, Mo Nishida. Not sure you heard of him or not, but we can go on them later. But he was like, I didn't know anything about it. Like, I didn't like go into Asian American studies at all, like in college. They didn't have that at our institutes where I went to school at. So all my Asian American and Asian radical studies is all mostly came from Mo Nishida. The Vietnamese end of understanding came later through the Hava Trung Viet School for Organizing, but like yeah, the event that happened like in the late 90s with the VHS store, like basically what happened was like the guy went to Vietnam after like his family had fled, right? And also like I believe one of his family members had died in the reform camps too. But like, but he went to back to Vietnam and he realized like, oh, like Vietnam doesn't seem to be too bad. I want to kind of figure out how to have a conversation about it.
yeah.
And so, um, he tried to give people a heads up about it around like the strip mall, but like, yeah, that was a huge uproar around that. But basically, he had the current flag of Vietnam and Ho Chi Minh, and a lot of people were pissed off. Like it was wild. Like I'm not sure you remember, like seeing like the effigies and like the mobs of people. The guy got beaten up too,
Yeah.
and then yeah, it was a long fight around that. And then did you ever hear how it all ended and stuff?
No, I mean, because I mean, it just I'm seeing this like it's in the '90s. I'm like a teenager. It's just something that's
Oh,
really stands out. And then when I grow up, it becomes like this thing I remember, and it's always like. And when I get into revolutionary politics, I always think back about the bravery of this one guy, that and it always like comes back to me, but I don't know that much about it. That's why.
yeah. So basically, it's weird. It kind of went out, and how I'm breaking it down is very kind of like a very short version of the story, and
Yeah,
I'm not very great with like remembering names entirely. Just
yeah,
remember all the events, but like at the end though, like they try like the protesters were like trying to go at him and get his shop shut down in so many different ways, but you know the guy had the First Amendment on his side, so at the end in the observation, like the only way they could have gotten him was just through saying that he was selling bootleg videos, which is kind of weird in my observation because growing up,
yeah.
like as a kid, like a lot of these places had bootlegs, like I just remember a lot, like, and so I'm just like, this is a very interesting way they got this guy. But interesting enough, like I'm not sure but and I know it's similar to like certain Central American communities. Like I believe it's like Salvadorians, particularly in the '80s. But like with people in Vietnam, like the Vietnamese diaspora, like that situation with that guy in the '90s, that was just more like on the lighter end, unfortunately, because like before that, like during the '80s, there was a lot of like mass attacks against, not like mass, but there was like at least about 5 um, political assassinations
Oh, wow.
against anyone that was considered like communist in the Vietnamese community. That included journalists and also one like guy that was had a nonprofit up in the Bay Area, and that was a big story right there. The guy's name is Dong. He was controversial because he was similar to what the guy did in the late '90s, try to figure out how to have dialogue with like the community, um, and so yeah, he was playing stuff on this radio of Ho Chi Minh recordings, and then yeah, he got assassinated. But even there's controversy around that too, because like a lot of it is tied to this very popular nonprofit in Lo Saigon called um, the Viet Tang. So like, there's been one documentary that I think was on Frontline, um, and it was directed. It was produced by this Vietnamese radical who was also a founding member of this Vietnamese organization I'm involved with called Viet Unity. Anyways, like even when the documentary was made, they ended with death threats, but again, not as bad as actually getting killed. But going backwards into time more, like this, like there's still that connection. Like the attacks have gone further back to even to like the early '70s with left-wing Vietnamese activists, particularly the ones that came here from there. It was this U.S. South Vietnam program where they were bringing in students from South Vietnam as part of a pro-youth program, but they ended up, I guess you say, like turning coat, like they switched sides in certain ways when they got radicalized by like the Black and Chicano power movements that was going on in Berkeley.
Yeah.
It's kind of how you hear about the Chicano and Black Indigenous war Vietnam soldiers that get radicalized by the Vietnamese.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's this interesting dual relations with that. So yeah. So that's it. Yeah.
Kwame Ture, I remember reading in his biography, he wrote about these Algerians who were involved with the part of like the French Foreign Legion, right? And they were fighting in Vietnam, and they would get captured and oftentimes be radicalized. And a lot of those people actually made it up the revolutionary forces in Algeria, who would end up fighting the French at a later time period. So I mean, there's a long history of that, and just the role that Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Cong have played in inspiring so much around the world. Yeah, definitely. Can you tell us a little bit more about Mona Tashida? Mona Tashida?
Mona Tashida,
Yeah.
talk more about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, like, Mo Nishida is like, he's like in his late 80s. I first met him at through another guy who I used to organize with at the Panther Alumni Breakfast back in 2012. And so that's how I got connected with him in the first place. But basically, like, he's like this old Japanese guy. He was a survivor of the Japanese concentration camps back during World War II, and so that's where some of his early experiences with the U.S. was. So from there, he somehow got radicalized through Malcolm X, because actually, for folks that want to like learn more and hear from him directly, there, hopefully it's okay. I plug in like this one podcast called South.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This podcast called Southpaw. You look up the podcast Southpaw. It's this left of MMA based like podcast. It's co-hosted by these two Korean American guys. One of them is in K-Town, but they interview Mo Nishida. But like he talks about how he was actually a right winger and stuff. Like before and that's something that we can talk to more about. Like as far as like why and how people are reactionary, especially with like working people of color and stuff. But like so yeah, he's this older Japanese activist from the 60s, and he actually did some work with the Panthers and also did work with the with AIM too, especially during the Wounded Knee um, shooting with the FBI. So that's pretty much the short version of the story with Momoshida. His main work in back in the day with the Asian American community was more with around drug rehabilitation. So that's one of the things I dig about working, like learning from Mo relating to like rehabilitation, because I feel like a lot of the work in the Vietnamese community involves trauma work, you know. But so that's a bit with what Mo Nishida is all about.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, about like this kind of a right wing flirtation that I'm sure like it's not just about you. I mean, like this is something that like a lot of us in this country experience. I know I myself, I don't know if I ever had any right wing flirtation, but I when I look back when I was 13, 14 years old, I kind of had that. I don't know. I could have very easily gone like with Proud Boy tendencies, just like to make a joke of myself and then make a joke of everyone else. I mean, like, like you get all hipstery. I mean, that was my experience. But
Yeah, yeah.
you speak for your own your own kind of like flirtation with the right wing and what pulled you out of it.
What maybe go into the right wing a bit?
What made you like think about it or consider it or
Oh
look
yeah.
at it? Yeah, yeah.
I've This is something I feel like this talk about. I've even with one of the co-hosts of Southpaw, Sam, who I talk to here and there, and that's part of his theme of the podcast too to check out. Even with the group that him and I are in online and stuff, where um, how some of us could have started leaning towards right and were leaning towards right. I mean, for me, again, it was like the traumas of communism or what was taught about communism at the time, which I feel like more is related to like what is revolution rather than like the ideology. It's more like the stage and process that I feel like people are more concerned with. But like another thing too that's talked about with certain people is like the relationship with masculinity and stuff.
Yeah.
Especially like before radicalism, and I feel like how I was trying to live my life was through martial arts because that's what I was into a lot since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of figured out how to try to integrate that in with my philosophy on politics too. The same with the co-host Sam. Um, but yeah, I feel like it's a relationship with like in certain ways with masculinity and like how masculinity relates to the ideologies of private property, you know. So I feel like those are some of the components of where I
Yeah.
started leaning towards the right there. You okay?
Absolutely. I remember as a kid. I mean, that's my experience, and maybe I don't know if you had the same experience, but I remember watching this movie Falling Down, right, with Michael Douglas, and he's this white man who's like had enough, and he's going around beating everyone up, right? But there was a part of me that really identified with that, like, yeah, 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 that's right. Don't take no shit. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Until he started shooting at a bunch of Mexicans, right? Then I was like, oh, what the fuck? Like it wasn't until I saw this guy shooting until I realized I'm not the guy behind the gun. I'm the one getting shot at. That it really like clicked around. But the reason the whole thing I identified with it because I saw this guy who was not going to sit in traffic and he was not going to do this. And if somebody didn't have his change at the right time, he was gonna beat their ass. It's a bunch of tough guy bullshit, right? But like that made me identify with it until I'm the one getting shot at, right? Then I'm like, oh no, this is bad. Did you have a kind of similar like? Maybe not with that movie, but was that kind of similar?
Yeah, it's funny because like I feel like with movies there is that element with like certain movies in the 80s like Rambo, especially Rambo 2, more Rambo 2 because Rambo 1 is definitely more like anti-war, but Rambo 2 it's like revenge of the Vietnam War. And I know that was always kind of like a mixed reaction with some of my members of my family. Like my mom wasn't sure about. It's like my mom, anytime MASH would come on, she'd like, "Can you change the channel?" But like with Rambo, I just remember like my dad's side of the family would be like kind of watching it a bit. But same time, like not to get off to a tangent, but it kind of reminds me of like this YouTube channel you should check out called Renegade Cut because that kind of helped affirm certain things with movies, like particularly the 80s, where like that's certain movie like we with the 80s, like the rise of neoliberalism, right? all over the world in different ways, or like some mixture of capitalism, especially in certain socialist countries like China.
Yeah.
But like, and we can go into that later and stuff. But like, or another time. But like, yeah, it's weird thing with movies, especially with culture. Especially like
Yeah.
the work that you and I do. There's an emphasis of culture, helping shift the mindset of people and hopefully shift the economics. It's that dialect of materialism process that exists in culture. So, then that's a part where that's where it kind of helped keep me from going to the right wing because of like my understanding of racism. Um, yeah, it's just like, and then when you start really understanding like deeper what racism is and how it connects to private property and capitalism, then it's like, well, what else is it if it's not private property? Then what's the opposite of that?
Yeah.
So
And I think that's really interesting. I think we have a similar background in that, or similar experience with this. That the things that pulled towards the right were like this, like hyper masculinity, right? Which as a young man, you might gravitate towards, and it's not good. It's bad.
yeah.
And that kind of pulls you towards that thing. But then the racism of the United States of America doesn't fully allow you into it, and that pushes you back out. So it's a push pull kind of thing. And I definitely had that my experience that with myself. I mean, I don't know how far right I was really going, but that general kind of identification with power, right? Definitely. As a young man, I definitely felt that. I want to ask you something though, because for those in the audience watching, we're gonna have to cut this at 30 minutes. So this is part one, then we're gonna do part two. In part two, we're gonna talk more about current politics, COVID. But what's kind of broken out right now is more of a conversation around culture. So I'm gonna ask you to share a poem in a minute. But I'm interested because we had this conversation about a recent film, about a recent show that was on, which was The Watchmen, and it in many ways was really a fantastic show, showing a lot of really great things. But it seems like social justice struggle in America is so domestic oriented that we can't look at the international question, because if we look at from the perspective of the Vietnamese War, I mean this is not very, this is a bad thing, right? I mean this is actually a pretty uh, not very social justice kind of show.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a reification of imperialism,
With the show, that's how you feel with the miniseries Watchmen,
Yeah,
is that it justifies imperialism.
right. I mean, like it ends with them killing this Vietnamese woman whose like only crime is that maybe she's gonna do something wrong, right?
You're talking about with the movie
With
or
the TV show,
Let's see.
the HBO show.
Yeah, which part of the miniseries again are you
So
describing?
the final episodes.
Uh-huh. Oh, that
With
they killed. Yeah, that they killed.
Lady
Uh,
True.
yeah, they killed Lady True.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That part I haven't really thought about too much as far as like what the meaning was behind her dying off of that. That's something for me to explore a bit more too on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, I'm watching this, right, and I'm seeing this guy, Dr. Manhattan. He's committed horrible war crimes against Vietnam. We never discussed this. This is never like he's never held against him, and then his final act is to make sure that this Vietnamese woman does not inherit his powers. And that's and that's how the show ends.
Trying to think here. Was it Dr. Manhattan or was it Ozymandias?
Ozymandias kills her, but he sends Ozymandias back in time to, he's got all these powers, so he's like he sets it in motion that Ozymandias is going to be in position to kill her.
Yeah.
I'm a whole other thing. This guy's killing his own daughter. I mean, that's just, like,
Yeah. I mean, that's like a whole other thing too. Is like you can't have her get the powers. Yeah, I mean that's a very tough thing with Lady True, because like from my observation of Lady True's character is that she was kind of like an anti-hero of sorts. Like my observation is that she wants to help, but and that's something we can go into more about, like with the left too, like and that's something I picked up from Mo too, where it's just like traumatized people want to be liberated, but still not having everything that traumatized them fully sorted out. that's my observation of Lady Tree,
Yeah.
as far as like her character, as far as like, like um, how she interacts with people, how she behaves. It just seems like she's come from a place of trauma, and so it was justified. You know what I mean? But then that's like to me, it kind of shows like what happens with certain forms of leadership when like there's like unchecked mental health issues. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
So
yeah, no, there's a lot of ego throughout
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so when you brought up with about Lady True and their death, it's like, this is something else I haven't really. This is like a different perspective for me to try and better understand. So
Well, I just feel like sometimes we have kind of a concept of social justice within the United States. Like, okay, this is really great because this person did this one thing for the U.S. workers, but we don't think about like. But then in the case of presidents, like when they pass some legislation, that exact same president, sends all this like military to Indonesia and kill 500,000 people. Go into East Timor, kill all these people, and send the same president, sending all this munitions to like fighting dirty wars in El Salvador, Nicaragua. Same president going, some different president, bombing several presidents bombing Vietnam with more munitions that were dropped in World War II. So it's always like we have this idea of like justice sometimes in this country, but it's just within its borders and it doesn't extend, to the fact that we live in a world.
Yeah. And I feel like there's definitely, and I was talking to another Viet Comer about that as far as like culture and stuff, as far as like, and I feel like it's talked about with like just Asian people in general, even with different ideologies, as far, and then sure it's like that with even in the Latinx community and Chicano community too, where it's like what this culture kind of tries to enforce on us, especially not being or like feeling like you're not supposed to be part of this land. I mean, different experiences because like obviously with Latinx and Chicano, it's like y'all were here already, and now it's like yeah, y'all are here, but you're not legal, So
Right.
yeah.
Well, I think the thing was, but but then again, look, so let's take, I'm originally from El Sereno, so let's take like the East Side, right? And in East LA, there was a giant march against the Chicano moratorium against people in Vietnam, right? This is a beautiful thing because more people were sent there than anywhere than any other ethnic group. They died in the highest numbers in percentage to how many there were going, like 5%, but like 20% of the dead. This is horrible, right? Same time in those same areas, all throughout, in El Sereno, where I was born, throughout the San Gabriel Valley, you're gonna find these MIA POW flags everywhere because they were sent to die, right? They were sent to die and they died, and they come back and they want to honor their dead. So they're honoring this imperial experience, right? So this is a mixed bag. I mean, this is like that's not good, and that's something that has to be confronted because that MIPOW shit, that's poison. That's terrible. So that's like.
Go ahead.
So I'm saying like we live in a world, and that's not often taken even within the national minorities or oppressed nations or whatever you want to call them within the United States of America. There's not the fight for justice is not always taken to the international level where it belongs.
No, you're definitely right about that. And you brought up about POW and MIA, those black flags.
Yeah.
It made me think about this video that Renegade Cut did on like the propaganda of those flags in relating to Rambo 2 with like, because I gotta look back and maybe we can look back together, but I don't know that it was actually like, because what they're saying is that when those flags were there, they're saying that even after the war ended, that the Vietnamese government still had U.S. soldiers, right? Is that what they're saying at the time? That they were just, that the bodies, since the bodies were never recovered, that they could still be held as political prisoners.
Right. What they're saying essentially is the Vietnamese government is lying to them.
Yeah.
But what it boils down to is the United States is the victim. Look what the Vietnamese have done to us.
Yeah.
We will get a revenge. I mean, it's essentially like the Marines shall rise again. I mean that's what it's saying. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, especially with like what's going on right now, where like, especially with April 30th, and like also like how like the deaths of the COVID related deaths right now is like, I guess they're saying like it's just the same amount as the war in Vietnam. So it's just like, well, yeah, but there was a lot more people in Vietnam that died than Americans in in Vietnam, you know. So yeah, that's why it makes it hard to watch those war movies growing up too. You know, it's like, oh, I see these dead bodies, and no, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna have to cut this one short because I know you got to go.
Yep.
But this is part one, and part two we're gonna finish up our conversation on culture. You're gonna share a poem in the next part, and we're also going to have more of an in-depth discussion of what's going on right now in the COVID crisis and why other countries have been able to handle it better, and what is wrong with the market system, and why the United States will never handle it well.
Okay, we'll talk soon. Thanks
Talk
again,
soon.
Matt.
Thank
Bye.
you.